Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to all who are listening to our voice in Barbados and elsewhere. I want to thank you for listening in and to say that we've just come out of our social partnership meeting. But today really has been a very hectic day. Um, Good and challenging in different respects. The reality is that there are two matters that we would wish to address to the nation. One of them relates to the change in protocols for those within the entertainment, sporting communities and churches. And the other one relates to the issue of the withdrawal of labor by some of the nurses within our healthcare sector. I'm going to ask that Dr. George address the issue of the new protocols for those sectors that allow us effectively to operate safely within the context of safe events for and safe proceedings, because I do not want to call a church service an event, with respect to the functioning of those entities in our country. They have been the subject of consultations. The Minister of Labor and Social Justice Committee, along with the Minister of Ecclesiastical Affairs, have had further conversations with the religious community along with the members of the Ministry of Health, in particular Mr. Chapman, who you know heads up the COVID monitoring unit, and obviously with the blessings of the Chief Medical Officer. And it has led, therefore, to some changes which will become effective with a new directive to be drafted by the Attorney General's office for them to become effective with respect to these activities on Friday the 17th of December. To the extent that it must change anything in the current directive, it shall, but other than these three events, everything stands in the directive which became in operation as of what it was, Dale, Tuesday this week? Yeah. Okay. So Dr. George, are you ready, please?
Good afternoon. So we've divided the issues into some various categories. So we will start with open air events. These will be mass gatherings or large gatherings of people in a single space. And therefore, the density and numbers to that event first need to be agreed to by the Ministry of Health, specifically the COVID monitoring unit. Therefore, all open air events must apply to the COVID monitoring unit with concurrence from the NCF with respect to the numbers that can be accommodated at those events. With respect to, and then when you break that down a bit further, for open air events, for the promoters and the artists and the people on stage who are actively involved in the production, both vaccination and a rapid antigen test will be required for entrance into that area. For the patrons, it will either be you're vaccinated or you come with a rapid antigen test 24 hours before that event. So there's a slight distinction between patrons and the promoters / artists. And the objective is to try to create an environment where the transmission of COVID is either non-existent or limited. And as I said, this will be guided by the COVID monitoring unit. If an event is being promoted as a vaccine-only event, please note that that is for the promoter to actually advertise, and it is not a requirement of the Ministry of Health. So you can have vaccine-only events, But please note that is not a requirement of the Ministry of Health. With respect to churches, we have agreed that churches should be allowed to continue. The current directive is 6 feet distancing within churches to maintain a sense of safety and security within the church. Places of worship, sorry about that, places of worship. 6 feet distancing in places of worship. But we know that places of worship and the faith-based community has been agitating for more. So therefore, we are going to allow 3 feet distancing within places of worship, provided that 70% of that grouping, congregation or body or whatever it is fully vaccinated. At this point in time, we are not asking for to enter a church for you to be tested. So that you either do 6 feet distancing, or if you want more people within a particular space, it should be 3 feet distancing with masks, with the caveat that 70% of your population within that faith-based organization is vaccinated. We also have some guidance for graduations, meetings, fraternal societies, etc. Those can continue. There will be guidance by the COVID monitoring unit. And for 3 feet distancing and wearing of masks, the requirement will either be for vaccination or rapid antigen testing. As you may know, the Ministry of Health does not strongly recommend that all Barbadians be vaccinated. We have not agreed to a mandatory focus. And therefore, persons entering a particular space need to know that to enter that space, they will be required to be tested using a rapid antigen test. And the rapid antigen test is actually a good test based on the current strains that we know about in Barbados. And for sporting events, outdoor sporting events will be organized sporting events will be certainly accommodated. For organized sporting events, there's a difference between, again, the persons who are actually involved on the playing field and the spectators. So the spectators is a bit less, and because they're in an open-air environment, and for the persons who are participating in the events, it's a bit more. So a bit less will mean that you either be vaccinated or you be tested, and a bit more means both will be required. As I said, if there's an international sporting event that is being promoted as vaccine only, those will be promoted as such by those private operators. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Now, over the course of the last, 9-10 days, there has been a withdrawal of labor on the part of a few nurses, regrettably. And this has emanated as a result of a letter received from Unity Workers Union that was written to the Director General of the Public Service on the 22nd of November, 2021. And for the purposes of accuracy and fullness, I'll read the letter. Dear Madam, proposed strike action by healthcare workers. The nurses and other healthcare workers who are employed in public health institutions and who are members of the Unity Workers Union are concerned that they're being bullied into a situation where they are required to take COVID-19 vaccinations and mandatory testing. We are aware that other unions have had meetings with the authorities to discuss this matter only in preference to other long-standing issues that have been on the agenda. Please be informed that Unity Workers Union has authorized its members who are employed in healthcare to take immediate strike action without any further notice to you if mandatory testing is implemented without any consultations and agreement with Unity. Unity Workers Union stands ready to meet to discuss the issue of safe zones, which would include vaccinations and testing. In addition, we are seeking resolution of other matters that have been on the agenda for some time. Please be guided accordingly. Yours faithfully, Caswell Franklin. Now, pursuant to that letter being received, the acting Minister of Health was Senator Jerome Walcott, who is here, and who met with Senator Franklin along with the Honorable Attorney General, who is also here. And I'll ask Senator Walcott to give a brief synopsis of what transpired in that meeting, which took place prior to any strike action being taken. Minister?
Thank you, Prime Minister, and good evening to the media. I met with, in that letter, met with Senator Franklin and members of his union on the 24th of November to hear their grievances and try to bring some reconciliation. We spoke at length about the safe zones, but I gathered during the meeting they wanted to focus on other matters related to nursing, other nursing issues, conditions of nurses, uniform conditions at the polyclinic. And then when we zoomed in on the specific issues, recognized that all of his nurses that were there were vaccinated, but they were adamant that no one should be allowed to be tested. There should be no mandatory testing, and they would not be part of the process. They made it absolutely clear. We tried to carry on the discussions to see if we could reach some common pathway. I suggested perhaps we are working towards oral tests as opposed to nasopharyngeal tests or nasal tests. They were adamant that there should be no testing and that they would not work in those circumstances. It was clear that there was going to be no resolution to the matter, and we agreed to continue to work to see if we could resolve it. But clearly, especially Senator Frank was adamant that the nurses would proceed on strike if we persisted in mandating that they be tested. So that done, and the meeting ended cordially, Prime Minister.
Thank you. And the second meeting took place in spite of the fact that there's no obligation to meet with anybody who has withdrawn their labor. Minister Bostic met with them last week. Minister Bostic, please.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I did meet as reported, and the purpose of my meeting was to try to ascertain exactly what the strike action was all about. And we didn't spend a lot of time dealing with the safe zone issues because I reminded the meeting that first of all, there was no mandate that was issued in relation to the safe zone policy because it had not yet started. We had delayed the initiation of that initiative because we wanted to do a bit more work. And secondly, that regrettably, even though one of our institutions, healthcare institutions, would have sent out a note indicating such that was pulled back and that there was no requirement for anyone to report for mandatory testing as indicated in that memo. So really and truly, it was a moot point at that point in time. But then the meeting really went into a lot of other issues that the nurses had the grievances about. Some of the issues are issues that would have been resolved. Some were in the process. And then there were some others that they wanted to talk about. So basically, at the end of the meeting, I came away feeling quite satisfied in my mind that the strike action was not about the safe zones, because it could not have been about safe zones since we had not really started that. So it ended cordially, and the nurses and the head of the union, Senator Franklin, indicated that the nurses will not be returning to work until their situation has been dealt with.
Thank you very much, Minister Bostic. Now, I want to be very clear on a few things because this is a country still governed by law and by conventions and acceptable protocols. And if we are to remain as a stable nation as we have been for the last 55 years, then it is absolutely critical that we continue to adhere to those things. The letter I read to you speaks first and foremost to the minimum threshold that Unity Workers Union set out in order to be able to take strike action without further notice. A copy of that letter can be made available to you, but the bottom line is that the threshold of there being mandatory testing having been implemented in Barbados as the trigger for strike action has not happened. Now, unless I'm living in a different planet or universe, and you are free to ask anyone at this table in the social partnership, and you are free to do your own investigations, but there has not been a single person required, and furthermore, Attorney General, the new directive that's necessary for the safe zones has been the subject of consultation, and the reason why it is taken as long as it is to implement is because we have responded to the requests of the different stakeholder bodies in the social partnership for deeper and greater consultation. It started with the Barbados Association of Medical Practitioners, and I think they were very clear. They made their position public. We met with them in good faith, and indeed we reported back to the country. We also had the Barbados Nurses Association, who also were very clear and put their positions very strongly and forcefully on the table, and they too were also adhered to in the consultations between the Ministry of Health and the Office of the Attorney General. They also met then, I think the last body recently, Madam President, of the NUPW was the National Union of Public Workers in the last, and the Barbados Workers Union. I believe that they are still to meet with them to settle. With respect to the Unity Workers Union, those two meetings that we just spoke about occurred. Now, if a person has issues, the first thing you do is to do what? Put them on the table. But for you to action strike and to say that a strike is your first option, you have not indicated with sufficient clarity what are the other issues that were referred to in the two meetings. What are these long-standing issues that you are concerned about? You can't reach to a strike before first and foremost identifying a grievance. And once the grievance has been identified, then you have to give the details or further and better particulars of it so that the persons who are either accused of it or responsible for curing it are in a position so to do after the investigation. There was a reference to a notice that had been put up in the geriatric hospital, and you heard Minister Bostic just now, but also when he spoke to members of the media, indicate that that was inappropriately placed without the requisite legal authority. The directive has not come down, and therefore it was removed immediately upon the ministry learning of it. Now, in spite of that, we've missed out grievance in the fuller particulars, because he gave the notice of a grievance, but never gave the notice of fuller particulars. The basis upon which the action would be triggered has never materialized. He has not asked to put other issues on the table in detail, as the Barbados Nurses Association has done and the National Union of Public Workers have done. There has been no discussion to determine what is the position of the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Public Service, the Ministry of Finance on any of these long-standing issues to which Senator Franklin refers, nor has he sought to say that as a result of those discussions, there has been a breakdown. And then even when you reach breakdown, you don't get to strike first because there are other things that you can do to escalate the matter. So that what we have, my friends, is something that cannot be described as an industrial relations dispute, because it has not in any way, manner, or form or fashion conformed with any of the protocols, not only of established industrial relations practice as endorsed by the International Labour Organization, but in addition, as reminded this morning to me by the Barbados Nurses Association, they too are guided by the International Council of Nurses Code of Conduct, which requires of them to clearly identify the issues, to seek to have them responded to before they can even consider moving it to the other level, reflecting the same principled approach of the International Labour Organization. Now, I am saying this because it is my considered judgment that this matter is not industrial. This is political. And we are in the silly season, and I've said it and I've shared it with the social partnership. That's just my view. But what makes it worse, and this is what has angered me in a way that really has angered me at one level, but has caused me to be deeply, deeply disappointed at another level. I received a report after midnight last night as to the details by some people who were there, who were horrified at one statement that was made. And I'm telling you what the report is, because with everything else in this country, I believe that I have a responsibility to explain to you where the government's head is and why it is where it is. There were some nurses who clearly were dissatisfied with some of the conditions and indicated that while being dissatisfied, that they were concerned about the well-being and welfare of the patients. And they were told by Senator Franklin, I am told, that you can't be abandoning a patient if you ain't come to work. And what the patient ain't yours. And that you need to stop getting attached to the patient. Now, I have heard many things in my 32 years of public life. But this has to rank among one of the worst statements I've heard in public life. Because the people we are talking about are ordinary Barbadians, most of whom have no choice. I have received so many calls in the last 24 hours because of the reports of the possibility of increased strike action on the part of the nursing community. There are people even begging me to say, Prime Minister, beg them. Tell them don't steal Christmas from us. And I said, the majority of nurses that I know are committed, and I do not believe that they will fall for any ruse by persons who clearly are not following industrial protocols, the best precepts of industrial relations protocols, but who equally, in my view, as an opposition senator, and along with other forces of opposition, clearly want to be able to bring some level of disruption to this country on the eve of Christmas, in my judgment, because they feel we are in a silly season. Now, if this is wrong, then come out and negotiate in good faith and deal with people in good faith. Because what you have here is a strike taking place for the last 9, 10, 11 days, whatever it is, in circumstances where the event that was to cause the strike has not happened. No, I've never seen such madness in my life. And I ask, how does a country that is regarded as one of the most mature countries in the world find itself facing a dilemma where families in Barbados today are worried, sick, worried about the fact that their mother, their father, their daughter, their sister, their brother, their father might not get the appropriate nursing attention in medical facilities because there's this big divide between the government of Barbados and Senator Franklin's union and the opposition, clearly. And you know, as a result, we have met up to this morning. The Barbados Nurses Association wrote and asked for a meeting with the Ministry of Health in the last 48 hours, and we went to the meeting. Because this is not about us wanting to do anything other than to make the condition of workers, particularly nurses in this country, comfortable, because we accept and appreciate what they have done for the last 22 months, especially in this pandemic, but before the 22 months, what they have done to keep the wellness and health of this nation to a certain standard and will have to do going forward. It was against that backdrop that, for example, I asked the Ministry of Public Service to please produce the record of what has been done to support the terms and conditions of nurses since this government took office. And the numbers clearly show that the number of appointments, and they couldn't disaggregate between 2017 and 2019 for me, but between 2017 and 2019, and most of it later, 145 appointments. But more importantly, remember the Public Service Act Amendment of October 2019, where this government took a decision that all persons who were acting temporarily in a position for 3 years, pursuant to that, 206 nurses on top of the 145 were appointed, and 4 of them had their matters confirmed by Her Excellency the President. She was Governor General at the time, as a result of appeals made under that legislation. So that brought the number to 210 plus 145. This morning we indicated to the Nurses Association that if there remain any other sets or groups of nurses, please provide the information so that they can be investigated and dealt with in terms of their appointments, but equally with respect to pay. But this is the same government who, prior to even the pandemic, in meetings with the nurses 2 years ago, determined that, one, that we would engage 100 Ghanaian nurses to supplement because we were told by the nurses that the ratios were too low or too high, depending on how you want to look at it, that we didn't have enough nurses. And therefore the government invested in being able to bring 100 nurses, because to train 100 nurses in the time frame needed was not possible. Then when the pandemic came through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we were able to engage and receive the services, thank you to the government and people of Cuba, of another 100 Cuban nurses, which we paid for. And then because of the pandemic, we have created 290 temporary posts to help us deliver the quality of health care from Harrison's Point to the QEH, to the polyclinics and the vaccine program, to the community health liaison officers, to the COVID monitoring unit, to the lab. 290 posts to the tune of $5.6 million a year. And then let's come to the terms and conditions. The Queen Elizabeth Hospital earlier this year agreed to hazard allowances. The National Union of Public Workers yesterday met with the Ministry of Health, asking that that hazard allowance be extended to persons other than those working at the QEH and the psychiatric hospital and the geriatric hospital. And the irony is this, that the Ministry of Health, and they will admit it, was paying persons hazard pay even before this formal agreement because of the outbreaks that took place at the geriatric hospital and the psychiatric hospital. So without having the union agreement, the government has been doing the honorable thing and paying persons the hazard pay. This government reintroduced flexi pay for nurses that had stopped. And in the appropriate circumstances since July with the advent of Delta, overtime was reintroduced on top of that. This has nothing at all to do with also responding on the basis of the environmental environmental conditions under which people were working. This government has listened. We came to office and found the St. Andrews Polyclinic and the St. Joseph Outpatients Clinic virtually derelict. Not only did members of the media join me earlier this year in St. Andrew and Belle Plaine, not to simply a rebuilt outpatients clinic, but an expanded outpatients clinic taking into account the realities of COVID and the need for us to have the appropriate density so that persons are not affected. We did the same thing with St. Joseph, if you recall. Morris Bayer Polyclinic has been receiving continuous upgrades. Winston Scott Polyclinic, same thing. Not to mention the 24-hour polyclinic introduced at Winston Scott to be more responsive to the needs, so to take the pressure off the QEH, accident and emergency. A new accident and emergency has been built. We haven't had any fancy opening ceremony to claim political glory, because it is about the functional nature of it. Most other political institutions would have had an opening ceremony and bells and whistles and speeches and hello. We have a functioning accident and emergency, and ironically, what should have been more space is still the same space because of the density issues of COVID that then came. And as a result, it has meant that work is now being done in the old A&E to be able to accommodate a wider range of persons as was originally contemplated when the accident and emergency building was designed. We are now in the process working as we speak at the St. Philip Polyclinic and the St. Philip District Hospital, where we know that issues of mold and other things have affected the persons working there. And the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Health has advised that those works should finish by March 2022. On top of that, the geriatric hospital, in spite of the fact that the government has agreed to build a new geriatric hospital at the Botanical Gardens site, there by Waterford, between the two, the domestic Botanical Gardens and the international one, because we believe that that kind of environment will do something for our senior citizens as they spend the last days of their life on this earth, that it will help ease the burden by just enjoying the beauty and the wind and everything else that goes out there in that particular location. We know we're going there. We know that it is likely to cost significant sums of money. But we could not leave patients in the geriatric hospital with roofs leaking or buildings that needed to be repaired. And therefore, since Minister Bostic came in, money has also been spent at the geriatric hospital fixing it up, in spite of the fact that we have to move, because with the best will in the world, design and construction will take at least 2.5 years to 3 years. And you cannot have people living under those conditions. But it didn't stop there. Without asking, we created the post of a specialist nurse. And we turn around and create posts for graduate nurses, because we keep saying that you cannot ask people to continue to work at the same salary level, and that what is needed is to be able to create promotion opportunities without forcing people to go into administration. That if you are a good nurse, you should continue to be a good nurse without having to go into administration. If you're a good journalist, you should be able to be paid better without having to go into administration to be a journalist. Because management skills and the skills of nursing may be two different things. And that a person who is a good nurse may not necessarily be a good manager, and a person who's a good manager may not necessarily be a good nurse. But it went further. Minister Bostic inherited a situation where the failure rate for the regional nursing exams was sky high. And he put systems in place with the Nursing Association and others, Nursing Council, community college to go in and deconstruct to the point where they recognized that the changes that had to be made in the training were critical to meet the needs of the syllabus for the regional exam. They've put it in place, and guess what happened? All of a sudden, the pass rate is 70% for the regional exams after years of abysmally low things. We've heard the messages. We had meetings in September at the QEH, at the geriatric hospital, at the psychiatric hospital as part and parcel of the commitment I gave to the social partnership. Indeed, members of the social partnership were at those meetings with us. When they told us about PPE, we gave the instruction about the adequacy. The government has more than adequate PPE. So that to the extent that there was a shortage, it could only be a oversight or some other kind of activity that was not systemic with respect to it. My friends, in addition to that, we promised, and it came up again today with the Nurses Council, and we will follow through on it because Minister Bostic has been literally behind Minister Duguid about the identification of a property as a home for nursing in Barbados. And the point that I'm making is that this is a government that recognized at the outset of this term that there were two-step children in our country's development: health and agriculture. And we made a commitment that we were going to deal with both. What you see here cannot have been done in the last 2 months, or 2 weeks, or 3 months, or even a year. This has been our work over the last 3.5 years because we believe that nurses, teachers, police, firemen, customs and immigration officers, general administrators in the public service, prison officers, port workers, water authority workers, if we did sanitation workers, if we didn't know it before, this is what makes this country stick together. And we therefore have said that we need to secure enough growth to be able to make sure that these persons who keep this country together are appropriately treated. But that requires solving what we inherited. We came to office and found $1.9 billion in debt. We came to office and found this country as the third most indebted country in the world. And all who all of a sudden now have a mouth to talk about where the debt and why we are carrying so much debt. Every single country in the world today has increased their debt in the last 2 years during the pandemic because of the cessation of economic activity across so many sectors. And I dare say those who have not increased their debt as companies have reduced their savings. And similarly as households. This is a pandemic. And as much as we must learn to live with it, part and parcel of learning to live with it is the uncertainty that goes with it. Now, what motivates the government? People who are rich can get up and take an air ambulance and go to Barbados tomorrow, tonight. But there are the majority of Barbadians, and I venture to say over 250,000 of us, who have no choice but to get their health care in this country, including my family and my brother, you know. So that for this, to me, is a very dear issue. And what I will not agree as leader of this government is that we are going to put at risk people who do not deserve it. The geriatric hospital has had 3 outbreaks of COVID. The psychiatric hospital has had 3 or 4. The QEH's outbreaks have been limited to the kitchen, the laundry, and the security crew. I'm knocking wood here because our worst nightmare was always that it goes into the QEH wards That's why this government spent $17 million initially, and then obviously in the conversions recently, more money in getting Harrison's Point available so we do not put at risk the health of ordinary Barbadians going to the QEH for treatment in this country. My friends, this is Christmas. We need to breathe. 2022 has been a rough year. 2021 has been a rough year. 2020, we wanted to see the back of it. But little did we know that 2021 would have brought ashfall, freak storm, Hurricane Elsa, and above all else, Delta, which made everything else seem like child's play. This country needs to breathe, and the people of this nation need to breathe. I am horrified, and I would like to believe that that is not the view of institutions in this country, of individuals in this country, and I would like to hear people distance themselves from the notion that these things can happen without comment, that you can go on strike without the event that is to trigger the strike happening, that we can ignore the best precepts of industrial relations. And you know why this hurts me? Year before last, I went to the ILO in June or July of 2019. There are very few statues or busts of any people in that building in Geneva. There is a bust of Sir Roy Trotman that I unveiled at the ILO because of the high regard. In the 100th year of its establishment, the high regard with which Barbados is held at the International Labour Organization. I also was given an opportunity to address that body. And I say to you that we are at a precarious point. We are at an inflection point in this country. And persons who can glibly and uncaringly, in my view, say, when asked what about the patients, can then tell persons who they want to be able to make numbers, because after 9-10 days the numbers have not risen to the level clearly that they would have liked, and therefore they're looking for company. But in looking for company, for you to say, when asked about the patients, man, you can't be abandoning a patient if you don't come work with the patient in yours. Stop getting attached to the patients. Now it is true, it is reported speech. But I think I know Senator Franklin for many, many years, and he sent that song like his to me. But what is worse is the breach of his own letter, his own words to us. I ask this country to breathe. And I ask every one of us to pause and to recognize that, like with every other country in the world, we face difficult and challenging times. And what is required of us now is to keep Barbados safe. When we became the government, the first mission of this social partnership was to save the dollar. We saved the dollar. Within a month of us completing our debt restructuring and ready to move, the COVID pandemic hit. And we have therefore tried to protect the lives of Barbadians, to sustain enterprises. We forget what we did for individual businesses, what we've done for self-employed people, what we've done for the tourism sector, what we've done when we had the lockdown earlier this year, how we put and provided care packages for over 80,000 households, doing all the things that other countries would have loved to have done. But because of our management of the affairs of this nation, we have been able to minimize the impact. Have too many people died? Yes, they have. And can we reach the point about the fact that we would like to see the back of this pandemic? Of course. But in managing it, nobody's going to get exactly what they want. Ms. Tannis and the private sector want more, and they deserve it. The workers want more, and they deserve it. The government wants more efficiency, and we deserve it. But what we all recognize is that a pandemic literally destabilizes the environment. The media wants more advertising in order to sustain their enterprises. But all of us are affected. And for us now to break rank, to reflect callousness, and to determine that you can tell nurses, abandon what patients? Them ain't yours? What madness am I hearing? Is this Barbados? Is this the Barbados that we know? And is this the Barbados that we want to build, having become the newest parliamentary republic in the world? I want to suggest no. And I've asked others, and I'm not hiding my mouth, to come out and tell the country how they feel about this. Because if it is believed by others out there that this is acceptable conduct and behavior, then we will get more of it, and we will get consequences from it too. And I pray that this is not where we are as a nation. And I know that the concept of safe zones, it has taken longer than we have expected, but it is because we are trying to consult. And if that means that we have to do it a little slower, I know the private sector is not happy, the union sometimes is not happy, but we are going to do it trying to preserve the integrity of this institution called the social partnership. I also want to address finally one point, because I know it's going to come up, and that is, will the persons who have withdrawn their labor be paid? Long before I became Prime Minister of this country, the Public Service Act of Barbados was passed. And the Public Service Act, at the second schedule, has something called the Code of Conduct and Ethics, which is part of the law. And there are certain basic rules in law, and we'll share them. The word may is discretionary, and the word shall is mandatory. At clause 20 of the second schedule, paragraph 20 of the second schedule of that act, it makes it clear that a person who has withdrawn their labor for strike shall not receive that remuneration. The Director of Finance will tell you that it is mandatory. Similarly, there are some persons who didn't indicate they were on strike, but they just didn't turn up, they didn't call, they didn't give an excuse, they didn't do nothing. And similarly, at clause 15, the power to be able to deal with them through the remuneration is equally there. These are not new issues. These are not the first persons to strike. They will not be the last persons to strike. This country has a proud history. In fact, I think the Barbados Workers Union, which is the oldest union, celebrated its 80th anniversary on the 4th of October of this year. I lead a Labour Party, and proudly so. So that the notion that we are going to unfair workers, I haven't even told you about the 5% pay increases, the only pay increase in the public sector in the last 13 years since 2008. I didn't talk to you about the fact that we also introduced a minimum wage. I haven't talked to you about not just the 200 and something nurses that were appointed, but over 3,000 public servants appointed. I can go on and on and on, because I am proud to lead a Labour Party. But what we cannot do is to kick down the very platform that brings order. And the reason there's a social partnership is because everything the private sector wants, it is not going to get. Everything the workers want, it ain't going to get. Everything the government want, it ain't going to get. And therefore, we have agreed as a small nation where it don't take a high wind to knock you down, that we're going to come together and talk through issues and try to reach consensus where possible. And where we can't, then we govern according to the facts there. So I have asked these ladies and gentlemen, I've spoken longer than I intended to, but I felt it was important to share the facts with the Barbadian public and to let you know where we stand. Are we committed to making this country safe? Absolutely. And will we work day in and day out, even if it means you've got to spend longer times to deal with it, to persuade people? Yes, we will. We said we're not mandating vaccines, but we want a safe environment. Deconstruct it. Safety is vaccine or a test that is within the last 24 hours. Because it tells me that you're not in a position to be contagious, or that the chances, I should say, of you being contagious at that particular point in time are much, much, much lower because of the recent test that has been received as a negative result. And we have therefore done that because we accept that globally the instability, the curtailment of movement, the curtailment of liberties generally has led to people having a sense of frustration. Ms. Dana said it this evening, we are COVID tired. There's COVID fatigue. But I wish I could do so and it gone. The United States of America will record shortly its 800,000th death. And Barbados' position has been not what we would like, but it is significantly better than almost a large number of countries across this earth. And I want it, and we want it as a government to stay so. But in order for us to do so, there must be order, and there still has to be a respect for the protocols and the disciplines. As it relates to the silly season, I'm ready to fight people where they want to fight in the silly season in the political arena. But do not use sick people or elderly people as the platform on which you are going to fight political battles. Do not do it. It is not fair to them, and it's not going to make a difference to you in the long run either. So let us be very, very clear that it is not worth it, and let us fight the battles where they need to be fought in the political arena. But in the industrial arena, if we're going to be here, let us adhere to what we know industrial practices best are. And I'm going to say this last point because it was raised by the former head of the private sector. Senator Franklin would do well to comply fully with the laws of Barbados with respect to his union. He has registered, but he's not complying with the laws with respect to accounting and accountability and the annual reports. And if you're going to start throwing stones, remember the parable and proverb, those who want to throw stones should not live in glass houses. This is not personal, and to those in the opposition who believe that this is the appropriate way to fight, I said don't do it. Let us meet outside. But as it relates to the nurses, I want to say to you that this government has your back. And it may not be that you can get everything immediately as you want it, but the record that we have here has shown a government willing to work with you, to provide for you, and to continue to do so according to our resources. Every child will tell the mother or father, I want X, Y, Z. And the mother and father will tell, I would love to give it to you. But I don't have the money to do all now, or you might have to wait until you get your brother, the police, or the immigration officers, or your sister, the teachers. All of us got to live. So please work with us together, and let us cool down the temperature for Christmas, and let us recognize that this country deserves a little easing at this time after an unbelievably difficult year for all of us. Mrs. Tannis, I know that you like to open the button, and therefore I'm going to ask if you have anything to say on these matters as we go forward, because I think that it is important, as I said, that the country not hear just the voice of government, but the voice of others as it relates to where we are on this most difficult and complex issue as a nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I just want to start on a positive note, first of all, by expressing the private sector's appreciation of the fact that we are now seeking to reopen the entertainment sector and wider civil society. I think that will be very welcome news for a sector that has not been able to earn income in going on 21 months to date. So we're very happy to hear that news arising from the consultation and the meeting that the Prime Minister would have had with members of that sector this morning. As it relates to the matter at hand, we certainly in the private sector wouldn't spare a moment to highlight also our concern, our deep concern, with the reported and alleged comments being made by Senator Franklin. And we would seek, along with the government, to distance ourselves from that type of approach. I would still like to believe that the comments have been misreported, because it is very difficult to think that anyone that has the interest of Barbados patients or any shred of humanity would actually take that approach, and therefore we certainly as the Barbados Private Sector Association would also express deep and profound concern with the reported comments as they were. As it relates to the broader issue of safe zones, I think it is clear that we do need to come to the middle to agree within the social partnership as to how we're going to proceed in this very contentious issue. We do think it is unnecessarily contentious, quite frankly, and that we all have to step back and remember why we're doing what we're doing. And certainly from the private sector's perspective, we appreciate the view of the government that the big picture is that we're trying to keep Barbados safe. We are trying to keep Barbados safe. We are all coming at that one issue, perhaps with different outlooks and perspectives. And we look forward to partnering with the government and our Labour colleagues in deciding how we can do that in a way that we are all of the same mindset. And Prime Minister, that's all I will say at this point.
Thank you. Madam President of the BNA, we met with you this morning, and we'll meet back with you on behalf of your members on Monday to continue to address the other issues that you have raised. I don't know if you want to say anything at this point, please.
Thank you, Madam Prime Minister. The Barbados Nurses Association, as the representative body, one of the representative bodies for nurses, has always worked in tandem with government to put the welfare of patients first. The Barbados Nurses Association has always sought accommodation and negotiations rather than end-stage industrial action. Therefore, we are looking forward to continual negotiations, collaborative dialogue with the government to better nursing and the lives of nurses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Bob?
Thank you very much, Madam Prime Minister. As a representative or the representative for the Barbados Association of Medical Practitioners, we as doctors, we take an oath to care for persons, to put the welfare of the patient first, to act as an advocate for the patient. And anything or any time that there is a divergence from keeping and maintaining that tenet as being primary, we get concerned. And as a result, we, upon hearing what has transpired, we choose to distance as an advocate for the patient. We choose to distance because we believe that every single patient deserves to be treated equally, deserves a standard of care, irrespective of your social standing, color, creed, or class. And so we will continue to act as advocates, and we will continue to ensure that every single patient has and will continue to get a standard of care in Barbados.
Thank you very much. NUPW, or Setu Saab first, and then NUPW. We'll come down to there.
Thank you, Madam Prime Minister. Let me say that the Congress of Trade Unions and Staff Associations of Barbados as the apex body for labor. We are not in the business of calling into question the integrity or questioning or the judgment or casting judgment on another registered trade union. However, we are very mindful of the fact that under good industrial relations practice, that we should observe three things, and that is practice, procedure, and process. And where those are breached, we of course will have to raise our voice against any actions or behaviors that are not consistent with the principles of good industrial relations practice. I think it's important in this particular episode to voice our dismay that we are in the heat or in the middle of a global pandemic and where the lives of the people of the nation are all at stake. And as a labor organization, we ought to show a higher sense of responsibility, maturity, and even professionalism in the way we conduct our business, so that we do not bring the nation basically to its knees by our actions. So we would want to hope, and we want to pray and hope that the current circumstance that prevails, that those who are in the middle of it will have a reflection on their actions and behaviors. And there's nothing, or none of us should be too proud to sometimes step at the plate and say, hey, I've made a fundamental mistake. And if that is the case, there's an honorable thing that one needs to do. But we want to ensure that we continue to operate at the highest level and the highest standards. On the issue of the safe zones, a matter of fact, even before I go there, let me say that the Congress of Trade Unions has consistently spoken against the issue of the mandatory vaccination and mandatory testing, and which the country has, and the government has recognized is something that cannot be done. We have not exhausted all of the opportunities or ways of treating to the current situation, and even at the point that we are not even, although we may have vaccines, we cannot say we can cover the entire country per person even at this point. And until those things have been exhausted, we can't move to that stage. And if we are satisfied and we recognize that that is the proper thing to do, I think any action that then goes contrary to that suggests to me that we are really pushing the envelope in the wrong direction. And I would want to say that on the matter of the whole question of the safe zones, part of the Congress's argument all the time that we need to understand the concept. And to do that, we have put it on the agenda of the social partnership with the hope of having a full discussion so that we can come to the understanding that all the partners can walk away feeling very comfortable in how we apply whatever arrangements that we have discerned are the correct approaches or strategies that we will want to follow, so that we have a level of standardization and not one person doing one thing, somebody is doing something else, and creating a level of confusion in the various sectors. So we hope that we can continue to work together on these issues and come to understandings that we have to bring to bear the sense of what I want to say, the true meaning of the social partnership. Always understand that we're here for a common cause and for the good and the welfare of the nation.
Thank you, Mr. DePisa. Madam President.
Thank you, Madam Prime Minister. The NUPW understands the industrial relations process, and this august institution will continue to operate in a way to preserve and respect that process. We represent the lion's share of the nurses, and we are fully aware of the issues plaguing the nursing sector. Most of these issues are issues we have made representation for to the government, and that we are in active negotiations on. Some of which, after writing to the Ministry of Health and the Attorney General, we have resolved. In relation to the safe zones, NUPW remains in discussion with the Ministry of Health on the rollout of the safe zones in the healthcare sector. With that being said, NUPW is not participating or sanctioning any strike action at this time. The NUPW itself has internal structures for instituting such action, and no authority was given to the leadership of NUPW from that body as it relates to participating in any such action.
Thank you, Madam General Secretary.
Thank you. Good evening to everybody. I would want to join with the private sector, first of all, in expressing our appreciation of the fact that there's going to be some ease given to members in entertainment and organized sports. The informal sector has been particularly challenged. All of us have been, but this category represents an area in the informal sector that has been particularly challenged by COVID and the inability to earn a dollar because of circumstances. And I'm very heartened this evening that to a very large extent, the protocols that we've heard about are protocols that have been initiated by that sector, recognizing that they need to have activity and they also need to observe the safety of patrons and entertainers alike. As it relates to the issue of the withdrawal of labor, what I would like to say is that the Executive Council of the Barbados Workers Union has always functioned in a manner, yes, the observed process, but recognizing that strike action is the ultimate action. It is one that is not contemplated lightly and without due consideration not only for the issues but for the support. We don't go into action and then try to build support for action. And we certainly do not go into action where we do not have a majority. And so even on that basis, I will choose to express my disappointment in that regard. I will not touch on the issues that other colleagues in the union movement and the associations have commented on in that regard, except to say that I support them wholeheartedly. The issue of safe zones, we have contended that to a very large extent, maybe the word safe zones alone is a misnomer, because there's no way that you can actually make a space safe. We can put measures in place to assure that maximum safety is assured, but we can never make a space completely safe. We have also contended as a union that these issues and protocols have to be examined on a case-by-case basis. When we met with the private sector in a courtesy meeting following the new president of the private sector assuming position, we reiterated that fact, and that in unionized environments for sure, there has to be discussion, because there will be no one-size-fits-all. And when we talk about safety, you not only talk about safety of staff, but what about customers coming into spaces? And what about other conditions like the physical layout of the organizations or institutions and so on? So we believe that the whole issue of safe zones is one that requires very full consultation, and we commend the government even after issuing initial directives for stepping back, and as the Prime Minister would say, allowing us to not only consult but to breathe a bit and focus a bit more on ultimately what is more important to us. So our comments align with those of our brothers and sisters in the union movement, and we hope that we can reach a point pretty soon where heads will cool and where individuals will revert to the position that they know to be the position that is sound and in the best interest not only of themselves, but in the best interest of the Parliamentary Republic of Barbados.
Thank you very much, Madam General Secretary. At this stage, I will ask the media, members of the media, if there are any questions. I think that there's some microphones here that can be facilitated since the matter is being streamed. If they can bring forward the microphone stand closer to you so that people don't have to walk back and forth. Thank you.
Hi, yes, good night to the entire panel. Madam Prime Minister, I listened carefully as you quoted the legislation as it relates to docking of pay for those nurses, but however, what I didn't hear was follow through, as would government actually be following through and doing it.
Letters went off today.
But letters went off today.
Letters
And
went off
could
from
you,
the
could you
Ministry
tell
of
me
Health.
how many nurses we're talking about?
I couldn't tell you offhand. All I know is that today there are 30 nurses, I was told, who have withdrawn their services today. I'm told that the high point, Dr. George, you had said, was 49. So that there's actually a reduction in the number of nurses who, from the high point number that they had of 49. But I can't tell you the details, nor will I get into it, because it's the principle which is important in a public forum like this.
Second question quickly from me.
Certainly.
Listening again to the discussion here, and I'm getting this sense that there is some impasse still with the safe zones. Do we have now a realistic time frame in mind when we can have that rollout of the
This
safe
is not an
zones?
impasse. As I told you, we're going through a process of talking with people. I said we started, BAMP raised issues. We met with them. We think we're good. BNA raised issues. We met with them. NUPW raised issues. We met with them. We have now to meet with the workers' union. And we've explained, and Mrs. Tanis in a perfect world would agree that she would like it yesterday. But I've explained to her that we're just doing this methodically, because what we want to do is to carry along as many people as possible. There are clearly different views. Senator Franklin's view is a valid view for his. And that's why to strike before you even try to discuss the issue in a meaningful way is disheartening. And that's the kind of political maverick behavior that I don't think that is appropriate at this juncture in our nation's history with the challenges that we face.
Okay. But in terms of a realistic time frame, I mean...
Well, we're working every day, Corvus.
And final question from me.
And the fact that we have, as I said, signed off on the safe events and safe proceedings today with the others is a good sign, okay? But, and I take Ms. Moore's point that maybe safe zone is not the right phrase, because you can't eliminate risk. So there will always be some risk at some point, as the doctors will tell us. But what it is that it allows us to manage risk in a credible way for the long haul. And that's what we're trying to do. And as Mrs. Tanis is reminding me as well, if you have businesses or entities that are going to close all the time, then the activity is disrupted on a continuous basis. That undermines their bottom line. If the bottom line is undermined, that undermines the stability of employment. So it is in all of our interests to be able to create that safe space as far as possible, or to put it another way, to eliminate as much risk as we can, recognizing that in this pandemic, it is impossible to eliminate it, period.
Okay. A final question from me. With the reintroduction of protocols for events and the testing that is going to be required, could you give me, logistically speaking, the capacity of labs, etc. to...
It's not labs at all. It's actually rapid antigen tests, which doesn't require the labs, but they must be approved testers The testers have to be approved by the Ministry of Health. So that may be a private entity. It might be nurses and doctors engaged privately. But whoever it is, the Ministry of Health has to approve both the tests and the persons doing the test. So it's not the classic PCR that goes to the Best of Santos lab, as you would normally expect. Okay, and there's a reason for it. People will ask, well, why you didn't do that from the beginning? Because Delta is far more capable of being captured in the rapid test in a way that the other variants before were not. And therefore, that is the basis upon which we've taken the chance. As I said, it's not perfect, but at the end of the day, this country has built out capacity. One of the reasons why countries restrict movement as well is also based on their capacity and to ensure that their health systems are not overrun. We now have, with the establishment of Harrison's Point, the initial primary, the conversion of secondary into primary, and the conversion of tertiary into primary and secondary, we now have effectively, 136 beds, Jeffrey, Jerome, with oxygen, roughly, dedicated, which is more than 4 times what the country had for its entire period of independence before COVID. So that tells you how much we have invested in making sure that we try to be ready for any eventuality. Okay? Any other questions? If not, thank you very much. I would only want to say that this is the first press briefing that I've had with Mrs. Tanis as head of the private sector agency. And I would therefore want to congratulate her warmly. She's gone straight into the fire, but then so have all of us. And we look forward, therefore, to working with you as we go forward in keeping this country safe.
Thank you
It is
so much.
also the first occasion on which I have the new president of the National Union of Public Workers with us, Kimberly Agard. And it is also, therefore, my pleasure to welcome her and to ensure that we can move forward, as I said, we're not always going to agree, and we know that, but we must settle and try to hold the center and agree on those things that will keep this country safe and stable, and that is what we're here to do. And to the rest of you, I'm not sure if I'm going to get a chance to speak to members of the media or members of the country before Christmas. I hope I will. But in case I don't, there's nothing wrong with saying it twice. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you very much.